The emergency klaxon screaming through the orbital mining station should have been my first warning that today would be different. Instead, I was hunched over my workbench in the maintenance bay, trying to coax life back into a temperamental gravity generator while cursing the cheap Terran engineering that seemed to define everything out here in the rim worlds. My name is Marcus Chen, and I'm what polite company calls a technical specialist and everyone else calls a grease monkey. 3 years ago, I was fixing hyperdrive motivators on Earth. Now I'm stuck on mining station Kappa 7, keeping ancient equipment running with spare parts and prayer. It's not glamorous work, but it pays the bills and keeps me far away from the war that's been tearing apart this sector of space. The klaxon stopped abruptly, replaced by an eerie silence that made the hair on my neck stand up. In zero-G installations, silence usually meant something had gone very, very wrong. I was reaching for my emergency kit when the station shuddered violently, throwing me against the bulkhead hard enough to rattle my teeth. All personnel to emergency stations, came the crackling announcement from Station Commander Reeves. His voice carried the kind of tension that meant we weren't dealing with a simple equipment malfunction. Unknown vessel approaching on attack vector. This is not a drill. I grabbed my toolkit and emergency oxygen canister, muscle memory from countless drills taking over. The corridor outside the maintenance bay was chaos, miners and technicians running in every direction, some heading for escape pods, others rushing to defensive positions. Through the reinforced windows, I could see something that made my blood freeze. The attacking ship was massive, easily 3 times the size of our station, its hull a gleaming silver that seemed to absorb and reflect light in impossible ways. Strange geometric patterns covered its surface, pulsing with an inner light that hurt to look at directly. This wasn't human technology, and it definitely wasn't from any of the allied species I knew about. The ship fired once. The entire station lurched sideways, artificial gravity flickering as emergency power kicked in. Somewhere in the distance, I heard the distinctive whistle of atmosphere escaping through a hull breach. We were in serious trouble. I was making my way toward the emergency assembly point when I heard it, a sound that didn't belong in the chaos of battle. Someone was crying, softly and desperately, from somewhere behind a collapsed maintenance panel near the outer hull. It was a section that should have been evacuated first, but the voice didn't sound human. Against every survival instinct I'd developed over the years, I stopped and followed the sound. The maintenance corridor was a mess of twisted metal and sparking conduits. Emergency lighting cast everything in hellish red shadows, and I could feel the cold of space creeping through the damaged hull plating. But there, huddled in the narrow space behind an emergency bulkhead, was something that made me question my sanity. She was humanoid but clearly not human. Her skin had a pale blue tint that seemed to shimmer in the emergency lighting, and her hair was so black it seemed to absorb light completely. Most striking were her eyes, large and violet, filled with an intelligence and fear that transcended species. She was wearing what looked like formal robes, now torn and stained, and there was something regal about the way she held herself despite her obvious terror. "Please," she said in accented but perfectly clear English, "help me. I should have run. Should have left her there and gotten to the escape pods while I still could. Instead, I found myself kneeling beside her, my engineer's mind automatically cataloging her injuries. Her left arm was bent at an unnatural angle, definitely broken, and there was a deep gash across her forehead that was bleeding a luminescent silver fluid. "Who are you?" I asked, already reaching for the emergency medical kit from my tool bag. I was Princess Zyera of the Velcaran Empire," she said, wincing as I gently examined her arm. "But my people have abandoned me. They have made peace with the Devourer fleet, and I am the price they paid for their safety." The Devourer fleet. Even out here in the rim worlds, we'd heard whispers about them. Ships that appeared without warning, consuming entire colonies and leaving nothing but empty space behind. No one had ever survived an encounter with them long enough to provide detailed intelligence. "The Devourers are here for you?" I asked, applying a temporary splint to her arm using materials from my toolkit. She nodded, tears streaming down her face. "My father, my own father gave me to them. Said it was for the good of the Empire. They want me alive, but they care nothing for any humans who might be in their way." Another impact shook the station, and I could hear the groaning of stressed metal. We were running out of time. The logical thing to do was to turn her over to the attackers and hope they'd leave the station alone. The human thing to do was something entirely different. "Can you walk?" I asked, helping her to her feet. "Yes, but why are you helping me? Your species and mine have no treaties, no alliances. You gain nothing by protecting me." I considered her question for a moment, listening to the sounds of the station dying around us. "Maybe that's exactly why I'm helping you," I said finally. "Where I come from, we have a saying, the enemy of my enemy is my friend. But, more than that, nobody deserves to be abandoned by their own people." Her violet eyes widened, as if the concept was foreign to her. "Your species truly is as strange as the reports suggest. Lady, you haven't seen anything yet." I led her through the damaged corridors, avoiding the main thoroughfares where devourer boarding parties might appear. My knowledge of the station's maintenance tunnels and service corridors served us well. I'd spent enough time crawling through them to know every shortcut and hiding spot. The escape pod bays were in chaos when we finally reached them. Most of the pods had already launched, and the few remaining were being fought over by panicked civilians. Commander Reeves was there, trying to maintain order while coordinating the evacuation. He spotted me immediately, his eyes narrowing when he saw my companion. "Shun! What the hell are you doing? And who is that?" "This is Princess Zyera," I said, deliberately not mentioning which species she belonged to. "She's a refugee from the attack." Reeves looked her over, and I could see the moment he realized she wasn't human. His hand moved instinctively toward his sidearm. "Chen, that's a Velcarin. They're allied with the Devourers. She could be a spy, a saboteur." "She could be," I agreed, "but she's also wounded and alone. And, last I checked, we don't abandon people who need help." The station shook again, more violently this time. Through the viewport, I could see pieces of the outer hull spinning away into space. Whatever the Devourers were doing, they were being systematic about it. "There's no time for this," Reeves snapped. "Get to the pods. Both of you. I don't care what species she is, if she can help us understand what we're facing, she's valuable." The last functional escape pod was a maintenance vessel I'd worked on dozens of times. It wasn't designed for comfort, but it would get us away from the station. As I ran through the pre-flight sequence, Zyera watched with obvious fascination. "You understand these systems," she observed. "You're not just a laborer." "Engineering degree from Mars Tech," I said, firing up the engines. "I fix things. It's what I do." The pod launched just as another section of the station exploded, sending debris cascading past our tiny viewport. Behind us, mining station Kappa 7 was breaking apart, consumed by some kind of energy weapon that seemed to disintegrate matter at the molecular level. As we limped away on emergency power, heading for the nearest inhabited system, Zyera stared back at the destruction. "They will follow us," she said quietly. "They will never stop hunting me. I have doomed you by accepting your help." I checked our course and fuel reserves. We had maybe 18 hours before our life support gave out, and the nearest human colony was 20 hours away at our current speed. It was going to be close. "Maybe they will follow us," I said, "but that's a problem for tomorrow. Today, you're alive and safe. That's what matters." She looked at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. "Your species confuses me. You risk everything for someone you barely know, someone who isn't even your kind. Why?" I thought about it as I fine-tuned our trajectory, squeezing every bit of efficiency out of the aging engines. "Because that's what makes us human, I guess. We're stubborn that way. When everyone else gives up, when the smart play is to walk away, we dig in our heels and say not today." "Even when it's hopeless?" "Especially when it's hopeless." She was quiet for a long moment, processing this. Then, she said something that would stick with me for the rest of my life. "Perhaps that's why the Devourers fear your species so much." "Fear us? We're barely spacefaring. Most of our colonies are struggling frontier outposts. What could they possibly fear?" Zyera smiled for the first time since I'd found her, though it was tinged with sadness. You truly don't know, do you? The Valkaran Empire has been studying your species for decades, ever since first contact. Every analysis, every psychological profile, every strategic assessment reaches the same conclusion. Humans are dangerous not because of your technology or your numbers, but because you don't know when to quit. She gestured toward the wreckage of the station behind us. Any other species would have abandoned me the moment they learned who I was. It would have been the logical choice, the safe choice. But you didn't even hesitate. That kind of unpredictability, that refusal to accept defeat, it makes you impossible to plan against. I didn't feel particularly dangerous or unpredictable. I felt like a guy in way over his head, flying a jury-rigged escape pod with a broken princess who was apparently worth starting a war over. But, as I watched the stars ahead of us, I realized something important. For the first time in 3 years, I wasn't running away from something. I was running toward it. And, maybe that made all the difference. The proximity alarms started screaming 6 hours into our flight. Behind us, 3 Devourer ships had appeared, their impossible geometries cutting through space with predatory grace. They were gaining fast, and our little maintenance pod wasn't going to outrun them. But I was an engineer. And engineers fix problems. Time to get creative. The Devourer ships closed the distance with mechanical precision, their alien hulls rippling with energy patterns that hurt to look at directly. I had maybe 30 minutes before they caught up to our limping escape pod, and conventional thinking said we were dead. Fortunately, 3 years of keeping ancient mining equipment operational with spare parts and determination had taught me that conventional thinking was often wrong. What are you doing? Zyera asked as I began tearing apart the pod's secondary systems. Her broken arm was secured in an improvised sling, but she'd insisted on helping despite the pain. Something probably stupid, I admitted, carefully disconnecting the navigation computer's quantum processor. But I've got an idea. Your people studied humans, right? What did they conclude about our technology? She watched me work, her violet eyes tracking every movement. That it's primitive but unusually adaptable. Where most species develop specialized tools for specific purposes, humans create crude instruments that can be modified for multiple functions. It's inefficient but robust. Exactly. I pulled a bundle of fiber optic cables from the communication array and started braiding them together. We call it good enough engineering. Build something that works with what you have, not what you want. The escape pod's engines were simple chemical rockets, reliable but slow. The navigation computer, however, contained a miniature quantum entanglement communicator designed to maintain contact with the station's central hub. Separately, these systems were unremarkable. Together, with the right modifications, they could do something the Devourers probably wouldn't expect. I started rerouting power conduits, bypassing safety systems that would normally prevent what I was about to attempt. Zyera, I need to know about your captors. How do they track their targets? She thought for a moment, her expression growing troubled. Quantum resonance tracking. Every living being has a unique quantum signature, and the Devourers can lock onto it across vast distances. It's how they found me even on your station. Can the tracking be fooled? Not by any technology one know of. The Valkaran Empire tried everything: quantum scramblers, false signal generators, even placing decoy ships with similar energy signatures. Nothing worked. I smiled grimly as I connected the navigation computer to the engine control system. That's because you were thinking like engineers instead of mechanics. You tried to hide the signal. I'm going to amplify it. Her eyes widened. That makes no sense. If you strengthen my quantum signature, they'll find us even faster. Will they? I asked, putting the finishing touches on my jury-rigged contraption. Or will they find exactly what they expect to find? The proximity alarms were getting more insistent. On the display screen, I could see the lead Devourer ship extending what looked like capture tendrils, energy constructs designed to disable and board their target without destroying it. They wanted Zyera alive, which was the only reason we weren't already dead. "Hold on to something," I said, activating my improvised system. The escape pod's quantum communicator began broadcasting ZYR's quantum signature at maximum amplitude, but I'd modified the signal. Instead of a single-point source, the amplified signature was being fed through the engine exhaust, creating a quantum trail that stretched behind us like a glowing breadcrumb path. To the devourers, it would look like she was exactly where they expected, inside the pod they were chasing. But, while they followed the false trail, we were already elsewhere. I'd used the pod's maneuvering thrusters to execute a textbook dead stop just as the quantum broadcast began. The pod's momentum carried the false signal forward while we drifted silently in space, powered down to minimal life support. It was a trick as old as submarine warfare: turn off everything and let the enemy sail past you. The 3 devourer ships swept past our position without slowing, their sensors locked onto the quantum trail that was now racing away from us at a significant fraction of the speed of light. They would eventually realize they'd been fooled, but, by then, we'd have a substantial head start. "Impossible," ZYR whispered, watching the enemy ships disappear into the distance. "No one has ever successfully evaded devourer tracking." "First time for everything," I said, bringing our systems back online. "Now we need to get to that colony before they figure out what happened." But, as I plotted our new course, I realized we had a bigger problem. The quantum broadcast had drained our power reserves faster than expected, and our life support was now running on emergency backup. We had maybe 8 hours of air left, and the nearest human settlement was still 12 hours away. "I'm sorry," I said, running the calculations again to make sure. "I didn't account for the power drain properly. We're not going to make it." ZYR was quiet for a moment, then she did something unexpected. She laughed. Not the bitter laugh of someone facing death, but a sound of genuine amusement. "What's funny?" I asked. "You. Your entire species. You just accomplished something that every military strategist in the Valkyran Empire said was impossible, and you're apologizing because you didn't do it perfectly." She moved closer, her good hand touching the improvised quantum broadcaster. "Marcus Chen, do you understand what you've just done? You've proven that devourer technology isn't infallible. You've shown that human ingenuity can overcome their advantages. This information alone could change the entire war. Fat lot of good it'll do if we suffocate out here." "Then, we don't suffocate." She was studying the pod's systems with new intensity. "You showed me how to think like a human engineer. Now let me show you how a Valkyran princess approaches problems." She moved to the pod's environmental controls, her fingers dancing across interfaces I barely understood. "Your species focuses on making things work with available resources. Mine focuses on extracting maximum efficiency from existing systems. Together." The life support system hummed as she made adjustments, and, suddenly, our estimated air supply jumped from 8 hours to 15. She'd somehow managed to optimize the scrubber algorithms and reduce the oxygen consumption rate without compromising safety. "How did you do that?" I asked. "Royal education includes emergency survival techniques. But, more importantly, I've been watching how you approach problems. You don't accept limitations as absolute, you look for ways around them." She smiled. "It's a very human perspective, and I find I like it." We spent the next few hours comparing our respective knowledge bases. It was fascinating to see how differently our species approached the same challenges. Where human engineering emphasized redundancy and adaptability, Valkyran technology pursued elegance and efficiency. Neither approach was superior, but together they created possibilities that neither could achieve alone. "Your quantum broadcaster trick," she explained as we adjusted our trajectory to take advantage of a gravitational slingshot around a nearby asteroid, wouldn't work against most species' sensors. But the devourers rely so heavily on their quantum tracking that they don't maintain active scanning for conventional signatures. It's a blind spot that only someone with human tactical thinking would exploit. And your life support optimization," I countered, "requires the kind of systematic analysis that human education doesn't usually emphasize. We're better at improvisation than calculation." "Complementary skill sets," she mused. No wonder the Devourers wanted to prevent alliance between our species. That got my attention. Alliance? I thought your people were neutral in the war. Her expression darkened. We were. Until 3 months ago, when human refugees from the Centauri colonies arrived in Velcaran space. They'd lost everything to Devourer attacks, but, instead of giving up, they started sharing their technical knowledge with our engineers. The innovations that resulted, they scared the Devourer leadership enough that they offered my father a choice. What kind of choice? Hand over the human refugees and their princess daughter as a gesture of good faith, or watch the Velcaran homeworld burn. She stared out at the stars. He chose preservation over honor. I was to be delivered to the Devourers as proof of compliance, and the humans were to be returned to Devourer space for processing. The full scope of what I'd stumbled into was beginning to sink in. This wasn't just about saving one alien princess, it was about preventing the Devourers from eliminating a potential alliance that could threaten their dominance. Where are the human refugees now? I asked. Hidden on Velcaran ships scattered throughout the Empire. My father claimed he'd turned them over, but some things matter more than political expediency. The ship captains who are protecting them are risking everything. A new alarm chimed, incoming transmission on an emergency frequency. I activated the receiver, and a familiar voice crackled through the static. Marcus, this is Commander Reeves. If you're receiving this, you made it off the station. We've got a problem. The Devourers aren't just hunting your passenger, they're systematically hitting every human settlement in this sector. Whatever you're carrying, they want it bad enough to start a war. The transmission cut off, replaced by a different signal. This one was clearly not human, the harmonic frequencies were all wrong, and there was something predatory about its rhythm. Velcaran Princess, the translated voice said, you cannot run forever. Return yourself to us willingly, and we will show mercy to the humans who aided your escape. Continue to resist, and we will demonstrate why your father chose submission. I shut off the receiver, my mind racing. The Devourers had obviously figured out their tracking had been compromised, and now they were using a different kind of pressure. Threaten innocent people to force compliance. They're bluffing, I said, though I didn't entirely believe it myself. No, Zyera replied quietly. They're not. The Devourer fleet doesn't make empty threats. They'll kill thousands of humans to recapture me. She stood up, moving toward the emergency beacon controls. I have to surrender. It's the only way to save your people. I grabbed her wrist, stopping her from activating the beacon. Like hell you do. You don't understand the stakes here, Marcus. I'm one person. They're threatening entire colonies. You're not just one person. You're a symbol. You represent the possibility that someone can stand up to them and win. The moment you surrender, that hope dies. She pulled against my grip, but I held firm. Hope doesn't feed families or protect children. No, but giving up guarantees that families stay hungry and children stay in danger. I met her violet eyes directly. You want to know what makes humans dangerous? It's not our technology or our numbers. It's that we're too stupid to know when we're beaten. That's exactly the kind of thinking that gets people killed. Maybe. But it's also the kind of thinking that keeps them free. The proximity alarms started up again. On the display, new contacts were appearing, not Devourer ships this time, but something else entirely. The quantum signatures were familiar but unexpected. Those are Velcaran heavy cruisers, Zyera said, her voice filled with surprise. 3 of them, military class. The lead ship was broadcasting on standard diplomatic frequencies. The voice that came through was speaking Velcaran, but the translation software provided subtitles. Princess Zyera, this is Captain Veltar of the cruiser Starwind. Your escort has arrived. Escort? I asked. Zyera was staring at the display in disbelief. Captain Veltar was my military instructor when I was young. But he's risking his career, maybe his life, by coming here. The communication channel opened again. Princess, we have word from the refugee fleet. The humans have proposed something unprecedented, a formal military alliance between our species. But, they need a Valkyran representative with diplomatic authority to make it official. The refugee fleet? Zyera asked. The human survivors your father claimed to hand over. They've been organizing, Princess. Building alliances, sharing technology, preparing for a counterattack. They need you to legitimize the alliance under Valkyran law. I looked at Zyera, seeing understanding dawn in her violet eyes. You're not just a princess, I said. You're a potential ambassador. If I officially sanction an alliance with the human refugees, it becomes a legal Valkyran commitment. My father couldn't disavow it without admitting he lied to the Devourers about turning them over. The tactical situation was clear now. The Devourers wanted to prevent this alliance from forming, which meant they had to recapture or eliminate Zyera before she could authorize it. But, if we could get her to the refugee fleet, everything changed. So what's it going to be? I asked. Surrender and hope the Devourers keep their word, or trust that humans and Valkyrans working together can find a better solution? She was quiet for a long moment, weighing impossible choices. Then, she activated the communication system. Captain Veltar, this is Princess Zyera. I formally request escort to the refugee fleet. It's time to show the Devourers what happens when they underestimate the power of alliance. As the Valkyran cruisers moved to surround our small escape pod, I couldn't help but smile. We weren't running away anymore. We were heading toward something much more dangerous and infinitely more important. The Devourers had made one crucial mistake. They'd assumed that capturing or killing one princess would end the threat. Instead, they created exactly the catalyst needed to turn scattered refugees into an organized resistance. And that, I realized, was the most human thing of all, turning defeat into opportunity, and making your enemy's greatest strength into their greatest weakness. The refugee fleet was unlike anything I'd ever seen in my years working around civilian shipping. Dozens of vessels hung in the shadow of a dead planetoid, everything from massive Valkyran passenger liners to jury-rigged human cargo haulers. But, what made it remarkable wasn't the ships themselves, it was how they'd been modified. Every vessel showed signs of extensive retrofitting. Human engineering techniques had been applied to Valkyran hull designs, creating hybrid ships that combined the elegant efficiency of alien technology with the brutal adaptability of human innovation. Weapon systems that had never been intended to work together were somehow integrated into unified defensive networks. It was like watching two different languages combine to create something entirely new. Magnificent, Zyera whispered as our escort brought us alongside the fleet's flagship, a converted Valkyran diplomatic cruiser that now bristled with improvised armor and human-designed shield generators. Captain Veltar met us in the docking bay, and I could see immediately why Zyera had spoken of him with such respect. The Valkyran officer was tall even by his species standards, with the kind of bearing that suggested someone accustomed to making life-and-death decisions. But, what struck me most was how he looked at me, not with the dismissive tolerance I'd grown used to from non-humans, but with genuine interest. Engineer Chen, he said in accented but precise English. Your reputation precedes you. Word of your escape from the Devourer tracking has spread throughout the fleet. My reputation? I asked, confused. The human who outwitted quantum resonance scanning using primitive technology. The story has become something of a legend among our technical staff. Zyera stepped forward, and, suddenly, the mood in the docking bay shifted. Every Valkyran present snapped to attention, while the humans, refugees in worn clothing and patched environment suits, watched with careful hope. Captain Veltar, she said formally, I request immediate conference with the refugee leadership. I have decisions to make that could determine the future of both our species. The conference room was a study in improvisation. Human folding chairs sat next to elegant Valkyran meditation platforms around a table that was clearly built from salvaged ship components. The people gathered there represented the survivors of a dozen destroyed colonies, engineers, doctors, farmers, soldiers, all united by loss and the determination to strike back. Dr. Sarah Martinez, who seemed to be the unofficial human leader, laid out the situation with clinical precision. We have 43 ships, maybe 15,000 people total. Half human refugees, half Valkyran dissidents who couldn't stomach their government's surrender. We've been hiding here for 2 months, pooling our knowledge and resources. To what end? Zyera asked. Commander Jake Petrov, a scarred veteran of the Centauri defense, answered bluntly. To hit back. The Devourers think they've won, think they've broken us. They're wrong. He activated a holographic display showing ship schematics and tactical formations. Dr. Martinez and her team have been working with Valkyran scientists to understand Devourer technology. We've made breakthroughs. What kind of breakthroughs? I asked, my engineer's curiosity overriding protocol. Dr. Martinez smiled grimly. The same kind you made when you fooled their tracking. The Devourers have superior technology, but they're rigid thinkers. They expect certain responses to certain actions. When we do something unexpected, their systems can't compensate fast enough. She brought up a new display showing energy weapon configurations. Valkyran plasma cannons are incredibly efficient but operate within very narrow parameters. Human projectile weapons are crude but can be rapidly reconfigured. When you combine the two approaches, the display showed a hybrid weapon system that could switch between precision plasma bursts and rapid-fire kinetic bombardment in real time. It was ugly, inefficient, and probably violated every engineering standard both species had ever developed. It was also ingenious. We've done the same thing with engines, shields, sensors, everything, Commander Petrov continued. The Devourers prepare for attacks by human fleets or Valkyran fleets. They're not prepared for attacks by human Valkyran hybrid fleets. But we can't make this official without proper authority, Dr. Martinez added, looking directly at Zyera. We need a legitimate Valkyran representative to authorize formal alliance. Without that, we're just pirates and rebels. Zyera studied the tactical displays, her expression unreadable. What you're proposing is war against an enemy that has never been defeated. The Devourers have conquered hundreds of species across thousands of years. What makes you think this alliance can succeed where others have failed? Because we're not trying to beat them at their own game, Commander Petrov said. We're changing the rules entirely. He brought up another display, this one showing Devourer fleet movements over the past 6 months. They're systematic, predictable. They always follow the same pattern: isolate a target, destroy resistance, harvest resources, move on. They've never had to deal with an enemy that adapts faster than they can analyze. More importantly, Dr. Martinez added, they've never faced an alliance based on complementary strengths rather than similar capabilities. Every other species they've conquered fought alone, using their own technology and tactics. We're proposing something unprecedented, true technological and tactical integration. I found myself studying the fleet composition data, and a pattern jumped out at me. You're not planning to fight them ship to ship, are you? Commander Petrov grinned. Finally, someone who gets it. No, Engineer Chen, we're not planning to fight them at all. We're planning to make them fight themselves. The plan they outlined was ambitious to the point of insanity. Instead of confronting the Devourer fleet directly, the Alliance would use hit-and-run tactics to force the enemy into increasingly erratic behavior patterns. Hybrid human-Valkyran strike teams would target Devourer supply lines, communication networks, and coordination systems. The goal isn't to destroy them, Dr. Martinez explained. It's to make them doubt their own superiority. Every time they encounter something they can't immediately categorize and counter, it creates uncertainty. Uncertainty leads to caution. Caution slows their advance and gives other species time to organize resistance. You're trying to start a galaxy-wide rebellion, Zyera said. Exactly, Commander Petrov confirmed. The Devourers maintain control through fear and the perception of invincibility. Break that perception, and their entire empire becomes vulnerable. It was a long-term strategy that required enormous sacrifice and patience. Many of the people in this room wouldn't live to see its success. But the alternative was the slow extinction of free-thinking species throughout the galaxy. I need to speak with Engineer Chen privately, Zyera said suddenly. We found a quiet observation deck overlooking the main hangar bay. Below us, human and Velcaran engineers worked side by side on a project that involved grafting human sensor arrays onto a Velcaran scout ship. The collaboration looked natural, as if they'd been working together for years. You could leave, Zyera said without preamble. Captain Veltar would arrange safe passage to any human colony you choose. You've done more than enough already. I considered her offer seriously. 3 days ago, my biggest worry had been fixing a broken gravity generator. Now I was apparently part of an interstellar resistance movement planning to overthrow the most powerful empire in known space. Why are you giving me the choice? I asked. Because what we're planning will change everything. If we succeed, the galaxy will be a very different place. If we fail, everyone involved will be hunted to extinction. You didn't sign up for that level of commitment. I watched the engineers below as they solved problems that should have been impossible. Human adaptability and Velcaran precision working together to create something neither species could achieve alone. You know what I realized back on that mining station? I said. I'd been running away for 3 years. From the war, from responsibility, from anything that mattered. It took finding you to remember what I was running toward. And, what was that? The idea that things can get better. That people, humans, Velcarans, whoever, don't have to accept the way things are if they're willing to work together to change them. She smiled, and, for the first time since I'd met her, it reached her eyes. Very human philosophy. Maybe. But, you're the one who chose to stay and fight instead of accepting your father's decision. Seems like it might be spreading. 3 hours later, Princess Zyera of the Velcaran Empire stood before the assembled fleet commanders and formally authorized the creation of the Human-Velcaran Alliance. It wasn't a treaty between governments, it was something more fundamental. An agreement between peoples who refused to surrender their freedom. The ceremony was simple, conducted in both languages with translations provided for those who needed them. But, when Zyera and Dr. Martinez clasped hands over the improvised treaty document, I felt something shift in the room. Hope, maybe. Or just the recognition that the impossible might be possible after all. The first joint operations launched within the week. I found myself assigned to a hybrid strike team aboard a ship that was equal parts human stubbornness and Velcaran elegance. Our mission was to hit a Devourer supply depot in the Rigel system, not to destroy it, but to steal their tactical database and leave behind evidence of human-Velcaran cooperation. The operation went perfectly. Too perfectly, as it turned out. They wanted us to succeed, I realized as we analyzed the stolen data. This is all outdated information, stuff they don't mind losing. Zyera, now serving as our diplomatic liaison, studied the tactical reports with growing alarm. It's a trap. They're using our success to track the fleet's location. Then, we give them what they expect, I said, an idea forming. But, not what they want. The plan I proposed was vintage human engineering, take the enemy's strength and turn it into weakness. We would use the Devourer tracking to lead them into a carefully prepared ambush. Not a military ambush, but something far more dangerous. We led them to the Kepler Nebula, where 3 other species refugee fleets were waiting. The Zephyrians, who had lost their homeworld 6 months ago. The crystalline resonance, whose entire civilization existed in harmonic frequencies the Devourers couldn't understand. The Hegemony survivors, whose planet-killer weapons had proven useless against Devourer shields. Each species had their own strengths, their own unique approaches to the same problems we faced. And each had been fighting alone, trying to use their specialized abilities to counter an enemy that had centuries to prepare countermeasures. But, when they saw what human-Velcaran cooperation had accomplished, ships that shouldn't exist, weapons that violated established physics, tactics that made no logical sense but worked anyway, something changed. The Devourer fleet arrived expecting to corner a small rebel force. Instead, they found themselves facing something unprecedented in galactic history, a true multi-species alliance based not on political necessity but on shared innovation. The battle that followed wasn't decisive, we didn't have the numbers or firepower for that. But, for the first time in recorded history, a devourer fleet was forced to retreat. Not destroyed, not defeated, but forced to acknowledge that their enemy was no longer predictable. Word of the victory spread faster than our ships could travel. Species that had considered themselves doomed began sending envoys to the growing alliance. Devourer supply lines came under attack from previously pacified worlds. The perception of invincibility that had maintained their empire for millennia began to crack. It would take years, maybe decades, to fully capitalize on what we'd started. The Devourers wouldn't give up easily, and the cost in lives would be enormous. But the possibility existed now, and that changed everything. 6 months later, I stood on the bridge of the Alliance flagship, watching as yet another species representative signed the growing treaty. The document had evolved far beyond its original scope, becoming less a military alliance than a declaration of principles about cooperation, adaptation, and the refusal to accept imposed limitations. "Any regrets?" Zyera asked, joining me at the observation port. I thought about the question seriously. 6 months ago, I'd been a maintenance worker hiding from a war. Now I was a chief engineer in an alliance that was reshaping the galaxy's political landscape. It wasn't a life I would have chosen, but it was definitely the life I wanted. "Just one," I said finally. "I wish it hadn't taken a crisis to show us what we could accomplish together." She nodded, understanding immediately. Perhaps that's the most human trait of all, the ability to find opportunity in disaster. Maybe. But I think it's becoming a little more universal these days. Outside the viewport, ships from dozens of species moved in coordinated formations, their crews working together on modifications that would have seemed impossible a year ago. The universe was still dangerous, still full of enemies and challenges that seemed insurmountable. But, for the first time in my life, I wasn't worried about whether we'd survive them. I was excited to see what we'd become in the process of trying. The Devourers had wanted to prevent an alliance between humans and Velcarans. Instead, they'd catalyzed something far more dangerous, the realization that differences weren't weaknesses to be overcome, but strengths to be combined. And that, more than any weapon or tactic, was what would ultimately bring their empire down. Because when people stop accepting limitations and start working together to transcend them, the impossible becomes inevitable. That's not just human nature. That's the nature of any species worth saving. And we were all worth saving.